President Trump's signing of an order to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
We are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Donald Trump just declared that the Gulf of Mexico belongs to the United States, and now he's taking action to prove it. This isn't just talk, it's a claim that has sparked global outrage and heated debates. The stakes are higher than ever, and the entire world is watching. Could this bold move reshape borders, spark conflicts, or change the way the world looks at America? Tune in, because what's happening will lead to the Third World War in no time. The fight over the Gulf's future. Trump's knack for grabbing the spotlight with audacious claims is no news. Whether it's his take on trade, foreign policy, or the economy, his words tend to spark both applause and outrage. His latest remarks about the Gulf fall right into that pattern. During a high-energy rally filled with cheers and chants, he made it clear. He thinks America isn't tapping into the Gulf's full potential. According to Trump, this isn't just about borders or maps. It's about power, resources, and what he sees as the United States' rightful dominance. Before we delve into this, it's clear that Trump's plan is far bolder than anyone expected, and this won't be the only statement that will leave you speechless. But let's hit pause for a second. The Gulf of Mexico isn't exactly unclaimed land. It's a vital region shared by the United States, Mexico, and Cuba. Each country has jurisdiction over its slice of the Gulf, with agreements in place to keep things relatively peaceful. Trump's comment about taking it back shakes up this balance, suggesting a push for more control and maybe a little less sharing. What does that mean for these neighboring nations? That's where things start to get dicey. The Gulf of Mexico isn't just some scenic coastline. It's a powerhouse for economic activity and a treasure trove of natural resources. Beneath its waters lie vast oil and gas reserves, fueling major energy industries and driving billions of dollars in revenue. Offshore rigs are a common sight here, churning out millions of barrels of oil each year. If recent calls to take it back point to ramping up energy production, the stakes couldn't be higher. Could this lead to expanded drilling? And what happens if neighboring countries push back against such plans? It's not just oil and gas that make the Gulf valuable. The fishing industry thrives here too, with seafood like shrimp and snapper playing a massive role in local and national economies. Add to that the Gulf's importance as a trade route, connecting ports in Houston, New Orleans, and Tampa to global markets. And you've got a region that's critical for commerce. Some visions for the Gulf seem to lean heavily on maximizing these benefits, but that kind of ambition often comes with consequences, and not always good ones. The choice of words, taking it back, is no accident. It's the kind of language that fires up supporters, painting a picture of America reclaiming what's rightfully ours. But what's behind the words? Is this just campaign rhetoric, or is there a real plan brewing? One possibility is a push for greater energy independence. For years, the idea of reducing reliance on foreign oil has been championed, and dominating the Gulf's resources could fit neatly into that strategy. Another angle could be a stronger military presence in the Gulf. By ramping up naval operations, the U.S. might aim to solidify its influence and send a clear message to other nations. This is our turf. However, such moves could ruffle feathers. Mexico and Cuba in particular might see this as an aggressive overreach, leading to diplomatic tensions or even conflicts over maritime rights. The fallout from such actions could ripple far beyond the Gulf's waters. Environmental concerns add another layer to this debate. The Gulf's ecosystems are already under pressure from pollution, overfishing, and climate change. Expanding drilling or increasing industrial activity could tip the scales, threatening marine life in coastal communities. Critics argue that short-term economic gains are being prioritized over long-term sustainability. Is the potential payoff worth the risks? That's a question policymakers and citizens alike will need to grapple with. Then there's the matter of international law. Maritime boundaries in the Gulf are governed by treaties and agreements, and any attempt to unilaterally take back parts of the region could violate these accords. Such actions would likely face legal challenges, not to mention condemnation from the global community. Bold statements may rally a base, but turning them into reality could prove far more complicated and contentious. As the debate unfolds, it's clear these words have struck a nerve. Supporters see this as a call to reclaim American greatness, while critics warn of the dangers of overreach and environmental harm. The Gulf of Mexico has always been a shared resource, but this rhetoric suggests a shift toward a more unilateral approach. What's next for this vital region? Before we delve deeper, let's not forget, when bold ideas collide with complex realities, the outcomes are rarely predictable and often far-reaching. While the rhetoric may seem straightforward, the implications are anything but. Expanding U.S. dominance in the Gulf could reshape the region's economic and political landscape in ways that are hard to fully grasp. Would this boost American energy independence, or would it spark new conflicts with neighbors? Could the environment withstand the pressures of increased exploitation? These are just some of the questions looming as this story continues to develop. His controversial claims brought strong reactions, testing relationships between countries and uncovering challenges that could not be ignored. Neighbors push back over Gulf control. Of course, not everyone saw it this way. Experts and critics were quick to slam the declaration as outlandish, illegal, and environmentally reckless. They pointed to international laws like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which clearly outlines territorial waters and boundaries. While the rhetoric fired up supporters, it also raised practical questions. Could this be done? Should it be done? And importantly, at what cost? Environmentalists wasted no time highlighting the potential devastation increased U.S. activity could bring to the Gulf's fragile ecosystems. For them, this wasn't just about oil rigs and money. It was about protecting a unique marine treasure for future generations. The backlash didn't stop at America's shores. Mexico, a key player sharing the Gulf's waters, took a measured but firm stance. Officials carefully avoided a direct confrontation, but made it clear they wouldn't back down from defending their maritime rights. Across the Gulf, Cuba's leadership watched warily, knowing full well that such words could upend years of fragile cooperation on everything from environmental issues to hurricane response. Hurricanes are no joke in this region, and joint efforts to handle disasters have often depended on neighborly collaboration. Fiery rhetoric could complicate these critical partnerships, leaving the Gulf's residents, both human and marine, caught in the crossfire. Now let's be real. Who owns the Gulf of Mexico? That's not as simple as drawing a line on a map. The legal framework dividing these waters is as complicated as it gets, governed by treaties, agreements, and economic zones that were hashed out over decades. The U.S., Mexico, and Cuba all have their slice of the pie, with boundaries carefully negotiated to ensure everyone gets a piece of the resources beneath the waves. Any bold claim, as powerful as it sounds, would have to bulldoze through these agreements, and you can bet the international community wouldn't stand idly by. But here's the thing, such moves aren't always about the fine print. Declarations like this feel more like rallying cries than actual policy blueprints. It's red meat for a base, a call to action that taps into their desire for an America that's not just great, but untouchable. The Gulf of Mexico becomes more than an economic asset. It's painted as a battleground for sovereignty and pride. Whether this leads to concrete steps or remains a soundbite, the impact of such statements is undeniable. It stirs the pot and keeps the conversation spinning. For many of Trump's supporters, the notion of taking back the Gulf resonates deeply. It's less about geography and more about a broader rejection of globalization, foreign influence, and the idea that America should ever have to share. America first rings loudly here, even if the logistics are murky. The Gulf becomes a symbol of independence, a declaration that America doesn't need to ask permission or play nice when it comes to its interests. Critics might roll their eyes, but the sentiment lands well with those who believe the U.S. has spent too long compromising on the global stage. Still, let's not forget the hurdles. The Gulf's waters are governed by more than just American ambition. The intricate web of treaties and laws, not to mention the environmental stakes, creates a minefield for anyone looking to redraw boundaries. Trump's take-back approach isn't just bold, it's a legal and diplomatic hornet's nest. Even if he could push through domestic policies to bolster America's presence in the Gulf, the ripple effects would be global, with other nations unlikely to take this lying down. The potential fallout isn't just about laws and borders, it's about relationships. Mexico and Cuba have long had a stake in these waters, and their cooperation with the U.S. has been vital for everything from fishing rights to disaster relief. Trump's words, however invigorating to his base, risk alienating these neighbors and throwing years of diplomacy into chaos. Imagine the chaos if a hurricane strikes while these relationships are strained. The cost could be measured not just in dollars, but in lives. So what's the endgame here? Is Trump serious about reshaping the Gulf's future? Or is this just another headline grabber to keep the spotlight on him? History suggests it's a bit of both. His ability to control the narrative and dominate discussions is unmatched, and this latest declaration fits neatly into that playbook. Whether he's planning a bold move or simply tossing out a provocative idea, the effect is the same. Everyone's talking about it, and that's the genius of Trump's approach. By framing the Gulf of Mexico as an American battleground, he's turned it into a stage for his America First vision. Supporters feel energized, critics feel outraged, and the media can't stop analyzing what it all means. Meanwhile, the Gulf itself, its ecosystems, resources, and geopolitical significance, becomes a pawn in a larger game of perception and power. As the debates rage on, the questions multiply. Can the U.S. really take back the Gulf? Should it? And what's at stake if it tries? These aren't just theoretical musings. They're the kinds of questions that could shape the region's future for decades to come. Trump's statement may have been simple, but the implications are anything but. The Gulf of Mexico remains a contested and vital piece of America's story, and whether it's a tale of triumph or turmoil is yet to be written. Trump's present actions make headlines, but his early years show how his determination and big dreams were shaped, from a Queens kid to a big dreamer. Donald Trump's early days weren't exactly your average upbringing. Born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York, Donald grew up in a massive house, 23 rooms to be exact, in a wealthy neighborhood called Jamaica Estates. His father, Fred Trump, was a tough and driven real estate mogul who built middle-class housing in New York's boroughs, while his mother, Mary Ann McLeod Trump, had a quieter role as a homemaker after immigrating from Scotland. Growing up in a family with money and a dad who demanded results, Donald quickly got used to a life where success was expected, not optional. Even as a kid, Donald stood out, and not always in a good way. At Q Forest School in Queens, his strong-willed personality and knack for pushing boundaries earned him both attention and trouble. His parents, noticing his behavior was becoming harder to manage, made a bold move. At 13, they sent him to the New York Military Academy. It wasn't exactly a punishment, but more of a way to channel his energy into something productive. And it worked. The structured environment of NOAMA was the perfect stage for Donald's natural competitiveness. He excelled in sports like baseball and soccer, took on leadership roles, and started shaping the ambitious streak he'd carry throughout his life. By the time he graduated in 1964, Donald had learned how to thrive in tough environments. He spent 2 years at Fordham University before transferring to the prestigious Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania. Wharton had a reputation for its strong real estate program, and Donald wasted no time making connections and sharpening his skills. While studying, he also worked for his dad's company, Trump and Son, soaking up everything he could about the family business. When he graduated in 1968 with a degree in economics, Donald was ready to dive headfirst into the real estate world. Working alongside his father, Donald's early projects were focused on middle-income housing in areas like Brooklyn and Staten Island, but he wasn't content to stick to his father's formula. By 1971, Donald had his sights set on Manhattan, a place where big deals and bigger risks were the norm. He saw potential in high-profile developments that could make a statement, and when he became president of the family business in 1974, he wasted no time making his mark. He even rebranded the company as the Trump Organization, signaling his ambitions were on a whole new level. One of his first major moves in Manhattan was taking over the crumbling Commodore Hotel and turning it into the flashy Grand Hyatt. Soon after, Trump Tower rose on Fifth Avenue, cementing his reputation as a developer who knew how to dream big and deliver. These projects weren't just about real estate, they were about creating a brand. Donald understood the power of image better than most. He wasn't afraid to take huge loans or gamble on risky ventures if it meant getting his name out there. Donald's upbringing played a huge role in shaping his approach. Fred Trump was a no-nonsense businessman who valued efficiency and keeping costs low, lessons Donald absorbed early on. But Donald also inherited his mother's resilience and her ability to adapt. a trait that helped him weather the ups and downs of his career. While his father's influence taught him the nuts and bolts of the business, his mother's encouragement fueled his confidence to aim higher and think bigger. If there was one thing Donald mastered early, it was self-promotion. Even before social media and round-the-clock news cycles, he understood how to make headlines. Whether it was through audacious deals or bold claims, Donald knew how to keep the spotlight on him. This knack for branding would later become the cornerstone of his ventures beyond real estate, from television to politics. His name didn't just represent buildings, it represented success, at least in the public's eye. Growing up with privilege and discipline, Donald had opportunities most people could only dream of, but he also had the drive to capitalize on them. His early years set the stage for a career filled with big wins and even bigger risks. It's clear that from a young age, Donald wasn't just following in his father's footsteps, he was carving his own path. And while his methods often sparked controversy, there's no denying that he knew how to make an impact. The fight for land and power is not new. The US-Mexico War shows just how far nations will go to take control and change borders. The price of expansion for two nations. The war between the United States and Mexico, fought from 1846 to 1848, wasn't just about maps and borders, it was about power grabs and ambitions. The United States had its eyes set on expansion, and the annexation of Texas in 1845 lit the fuse. Sure, Texas had declared independence from Mexico back in 1836, but Mexico wasn't buying it. They saw the U.S. taking Texas as a slap in the face, and tensions boiled over. The U.S. said the Rio Grande was the border, while Mexico stuck to the Nueces River. This dispute had trouble written all over it. By April 1846, the powder keg exploded. A scuffle near the Rio Grande gave President James K. Polk the excuse he needed to claim American blood was spilled on American soil. Just like that, Congress declared war on May 13th. The battles came quickly, with the U.S. flexing its military muscles. At Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, American forces showed they weren't messing around. General Zachary Taylor made headlines by pushing deep into northern Mexico, taking Monterrey and securing a major win at Buena Vista. Meanwhile, General Stephen W. Kearny swept through New Mexico and California like it was a walk in the park. The U.S. Navy wasn't sitting idle either. They blockaded Mexican ports and backed up the land campaigns along the Pacific. By March 1847, General Winfield Scott pulled off a daring amphibious landing at Veracruz. It was a bold move and a first for U.S. forces on that scale. From there, Scott's troops pushed inland, smashing through Mexican defenses at Cerro Gordo and Contreras. When Mexico City fell in September, the war's main phase was done. The U.S. was calling the shots now. With the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo signed on February 2, 1848, the United States scored big. Mexico had to give up over half its territory, handing the U.S. what we now call California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The U.S. threw in $15 million and agreed to cover over $3 million in Mexican debts to American citizens. The Rio Grande officially became the border, cementing the U.S.'s territorial gains. For the United States, this was manifest destiny in full swing. They believed it was their right, even their duty, to spread across the continent. The new lands sparked dreams of wealth and opportunity, fueling migration westward. But it also stirred up trouble over slavery. Would these new territories allow slavery or not? That question deepened the divides that would later erupt into the Civil War. For Mexico, the war was devastating. Losing such a huge chunk of land wasn't just about territory, it was about identity and pride. The defeat threw the country into chaos, with political turmoil and economic struggles becoming the norm. The bitterness from that loss stuck around, shaping how Mexico viewed its northern neighbor for generations. The war didn't just affect nations, it upended lives. Indigenous peoples in the ceded lands faced even greater hardships. They were forced off their lands, exposed to new diseases, and caught in the crossfire of settlers' ambitions. The U.S. government's policies didn't do them any favors, leading to more displacement and suffering. Then came the gold rush. In 1848, gold was discovered in California, and settlers rushed in droves. This boom sped up California's push for statehood, which it achieved in 1850 as a free state. That stirred the pot even more, upsetting the fragile balance between free and slave states. Looking back, the Mexican-American War was about much more than land grabs and borderlines. It revealed the lengths to which nations will go for power and control, leaving deep scars on both sides. The conflict reminds us how far-reaching the costs of war can be, from shattered lives to strained relations that linger long after the fighting ends. But the biggest question remains, was it worth it? Did the U.S.'s expansion justify the cost? Or was it just another example of might over right? Is Trump's claim on the Gulf a bold move to protect America's interests? Or could it spark dangerous conflicts with other nations? Share your thoughts and remember to like and subscribe for more.